Hi, my name is Julin Tong. Last week, I published a blog post in which I talked about the human, economic, and long-term social cost of this coronavirus pandemic. And a couple of days ago, I also recorded my this short discussion about the human costs of this pandemic. And so today, I'm going to focus on the economic costs of this pandemic. So, as I discussed in this article last week, I think in the short to medium term, the human costs are very high and should be our focus. The long-term economic and social costs and the impact on the economic and political lives of a lot of people should be really concerned. Should be something that we are really concerned about. It should be something that we pay attention to, because if we don't heed attention where it's due, there could be instabilities, long-term instabilities, and there could be long-term broad conflicts that mimic what happened between 1930 and 1945. That is something that I think we should really try to avoid as much as we can. And in my analogy, we are experiencing something very similar to the end of World War One, where there is growing inequality, where there is broad conflict, not a hot war in this time around, but a cold war. And then we have this pandemic. So something that we really should be really careful about. Now, in this article, I basically talked about the economic costs of different major economies, and I think the most maybe not interesting, but maybe the most impactful one is the cost to the United States of America. I say this because the United States of America has perhaps across major economies the largest percentage of people who are the most vulnerable to pandemics like this. These are the temporary workers. Those are the low-income workers. Those are people who don't own assets, or maybe they own some assets, but they have a lot of they're quite leveraged on those assets. These people are very vulnerable to disruptions to their income, and at the same time, the same group of people, the same disenfranchised group of people, are also arguably more vulnerable in terms of access to health services, where this is because in the United States of America, there is a profit-driven healthcare system that prioritizes, of course, the bottom line over health outcomes. So that basically means that the potential for large disruptions to the economic lives of a lot of American people is one of the highest across major economies. At the same time, we have witnessed we have again being confirmed of the priorities of the government of the United States of America, where this is reflected of course, in the handling of this crisis by the federal government of the United States. It is also reflected by the rescue package that has just been approved. I think yesterday, the Senate bill, which basically is a major bailout of corporate America, with some crumbs for the average people, for workers in America. So in this context, we can have no doubt that in America, inequality, if nothing changes, when this is all over, the level of inequality will be even worse, where the rich will get even richer, because now we have $500 billion bailout fund, which are going to be leveraged 10 times. That means $4 to $5 trillion in the pockets of some of the richest people in the world, where at the same time workers get a one-time payment of $1,200, which, considering how they are leveraged, considering the interest rate on their credit card bills, it probably is not very it's not really enough. But how to say, this is of course not as meant for as a criticism of the American government, because there is very little they could do. I think this government didn't make the American society as unequal as it is today. It only made it more so, right? It's not the one that started this. This started in the 1980s, 1970s. I just read again that in the 1960s, the difference of pay between the CEO and the workers was what, a dozen times, and today it was over 400 times, and so there has been a growing level of inequality. This is going to be very bad, right, in America. So in the past couple of days, because of this rescue package, bailouts, the stock market has been going up, and since the US dollar has been dropping precipitously, this also fueled a stock market boom temporarily. And for the relationship between the currency and the stock market is basically that since the dollar has become less valuable, the stock, which presumably denotes assets that are holding their value, their price should go up. So that's probably the mechanism in brief. Now, we can probably agree, I hope we can agree, that this stock market boom is temporary, because it doesn't address the fundamental issues of this current situation. On the one hand, this is because the profits of companies are going to come down, and there are going to be more uncertainties that are going to affect the valuations of the market, with or without a pandemic like the one that we're experiencing. At the same time, since there is this pandemic, the impact on the American economy is not really predictable. It's, in my opinion, unpredictable at the moment. If this virus is friendly, if it mutates to be to a much milder strain and it just disappears, like Donald Trump says, magically, and then the impact, and suddenly, if it just suddenly disappears in April, just like Trump predicted, then the impact on the American economy is well controlled, and the stock market should really recover very quickly. By the same time, if the virus doesn't follow the wish of many, if the virus just continue to rave, how to say, just to do its to collect its tolls, then the damage to American economy is going to be very severe, and we could expect to see a significant contraction in the American economy, and in that context, it is very difficult to see the stock market recover in the short to medium term. So that is something that we should be really mindful about. In this article, of course, I mentioned bailouts, and of course we've already seen bailouts to big corporations, and this should be expected because they have paid their due to the lawmakers and the government officials, and how could they not be paid, right? So that's that. And in terms of the European Union, this is going to be very tough on the EU. It is almost a certainty, in my opinion, that some countries will default on their debt because they simply cannot pay them back, right? And countries, the worst hit countries, Italy, France, Spain, none of them have their GDPs higher than they were before the 2008 crisis, 2007, 2008. None of them have recovered from that crisis, and now we're digging a deeper hole. In Italy's case, it basically means that we have to deduct at least 3-4 months from the year's production. That probably means that we're going to see 10%, 20% contraction in the economy of those countries, and the budgets are going to be really blown way out of what could be expected just a short few months ago. And that basically means that they cannot pay back their debt, and so there's going to be a new round of sovereign debt and currency problems in the European Union. And this time, I hope there will be a more structural solution rather than just patching them up with more debt, because those short-term solutions are not going to work. Also, austerity is not going to work. Those new liberal solutions not going to work, and this is gonna really be a deciding, in my opinion, a deciding time for the European Union, right? A decisive time. If countries continue on, if the European Union continues along the road of austerity, of raising more debt, of short-term debt reliefs, the problem will worsen, and alongside the rise of populism, of nationalism, the European Union will collapse. But if the European Union collapses, the European people will suffer, and I think the European Union will be comparable to India in the 1700s, 1800s, right? It will become a declining world region, and will become irrelevant very quickly. And there are a lot of problems with the European Union. Without it, the worst hit countries will become so unattractive to businesses, will be so unattractive to investment, and their productivity will be so low, and their hole is so deep that they will become very irrelevant very quickly. That will be very bad. So I hope that the European Union will be able to pull itself together. But it's also my prediction that the EU will introduce protective policies that basically means protection against Japanese and American businesses, and more importantly, protection against imports from countries like China and other third world countries. And I think a prediction that I make is that the EU will introduce protective policies in the tech industry, because this industry is where a lot of money is got, and the least disruption has been seen in this, the least amount of disruption has been witnessed in this pandemic. So I think in typical EU fashion, there will be a knee-jerk reaction. I think they'll probably slam competition or antitrust suits against leading US firms and probably kick them out, just like the Chinese have. That's my prediction. And finally, in China and other third world countries, in terms of China, I think China will be forced to really transform its economy. China has been talking about the transformation of its economy towards a service and consumption-based economy, but they are not really keen on doing that, because they're making money. I mean, the government is making a lot of money by exporting low-quality products to the West. But I think it is very clear, at least from the United States of America, it is very clear that this will no longer be the case after this pandemic. And I think in terms of the European Union, and there will be similar measures in place. And I think the Chinese government is smart enough to realize this, and so this really forces their hand, and they have to transform the economy. At the same time, I think in this real transformation, there will be some disturbances. There's going to be some difficulties, unforeseeable and unforeseeable ones. And I think the housing bubble in China, that's really a major one that's been developing over 2 decades, is likely to pop. So that's something that could be interesting to look into. And in terms of the rest of the world, well, there have been some predictions of growth across much of the developing countries, and some countries had been quite optimistic about their chances. But after this pandemic, as major economies become more protectionist, their opportunity of the window of using export and low-cost labor to boost, to kickstart the growth of the economy is probably closing. And this means that countries such as India, such as some Latin American countries, and maybe some other East Asian countries will find it very much more difficult to develop their economies, and there will be mass carnage. So this will possibly lead to some social issues across the globe, and this will be something that I talk next in the next section. So thanks for listening. Have a great day.